Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babyar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. My guest today, once again, is Joseph Murphy of CCO. Of course, Joseph just joined us recently to talk about phone calls, but we're also going to dig in a little bit and pick his brain about a completely different topic, and that is using a database. And I realize there's probably a lot of people out there like me that they hear the word database and they go, I'm going to skip this one. Don't do it. Don't do it. I think this is going to be a really helpful conversation for you. And so, Joseph, thank you for joining us once again on the SRS Podcast, my friend. I'm so glad to have you on again.
It is such a great joy and pleasure to be part of not just the SRS Podcast, but this specific conversation, because I would agree with you. Using a database and the word administration are I know they're things that people shiver when they hear those words, but I love them. And my hope is that by the end of this conversation, you will share my love for administration and for using a database.
You are asking a lot, my friend. That's all right, though. That's all right. See, I put it this way. I love people who love administration and record keeping and database management. I have to be honest, Joseph, I'm not very wired that way, but I've learned over time to manage my areas of weakness for the sake of the kingdom. And so there's probably some listeners that need to take on the same challenge. And so with that in mind, let's jump right into it. You know, during the support raising process, people, they come across not just dozens, but sometimes hundreds, if not thousands of people. And so depending on God's plan for their life, they might be in short-term ministry, they might be long-term ministry, but regardless, they're going to have to figure out how to really navigate the idea of having ministry partners, how to care for them, how to maintain good records, and that's administration. That takes some organization and all of that. And I certainly have some failure stories. So let's start right there, because now you sound like you like this stuff, but I really don't. But let me ask you first: Can you think of any administration or database fails that you've had in the past that really kind of ended up costing you?
Oh, good. Well, I like to think that because I've been pretty good at it, I haven't personally experienced this, but I can speak for like my organization. My role with CCO, we're involved with our database for the whole organization. And we've had instances where, you know, a donor has called in giving us a new address or updating about a family member's passed away. And for whatever reason, that information got lost. And so then, you know, communication goes out either to the wrong address or, you know, to a deceased person. And unfortunately, every time something like that happens, it's a withdrawal from the relationship. And there's work that has to be done to try and rebuild that.
Yeah. I actually had one fairly recently, I'm embarrassed to say. I'm fully funded, have been for a while, but earlier this year, I did need to raise a little bit more just because of some budget changes and things like that. Not a lot, but I had to raise a little bit more. And somewhere in the we'll just call it the administration, some of the handoff of information and follow-up and things like that was mostly on my plate. But also I had someone else helping me with a couple little details. And I thought I had clearly communicated those couple little details to a coworker, and I hadn't. And the ball got dropped. And it took a week or two to realize, oh, hey, wait a minute. That person had said they wanted to join our team. Somehow, in the course of some administration fails, we didn't clearly follow up with them as we had planned. And Joseph, unfortunately, I did try and get a hold of the person, and I never heard from him again. I texted him, I called them, I left a few voicemails, I apologized. I said, hey, we had intended to follow up with you like 10 or 12 days ago. We had a communication gap. I so apologize about that. Could you call me back? You know, I did variations and I got ghosted. I got the feeling that it wasn't my intent at all, but I had offended someone who had chosen to partner with me in ministry. And I hate that that's true, but I'm willing to share that just from the standpoint of saying it happens to all of us. But boy, we really don't want to have those stories. In fact, we want to avoid those stories. But it could happen to you whether you're a brand new support raiser or a veteran support raiser. And so it's the whole concept of learning to use a database and communication. It really is very vital, even if you're not super gifted in that way. So, with that being said, let's get into some key elements of database management, because there's a need for it in staying informed and communicating well with our partners. So I'm going to kick it to you, Joseph, and why don't you kick us off?
So yeah, I've sort of come up with 4 elements of good database management, and my intention for you, the listener, is to hear these things being shared and be inspired to grow in your affinity towards your database, to see the need to keep good records. Because the first thing I want to talk about is the integrity of your database. There's a principle I've learned working for CCO called garbage in, garbage out.
Okay.
And what that means is that if you put garbage into your database, when you go to actually use it for your support raising or for relationship building or for other ministry purposes, you're going to get garbage out of it. So if you, on the receiving end, as you're making contacts, if you don't put their phone number in your database, if you don't put their email address in your database, if you don't collect their mailing address and put that in your database, that information will not be available to you later.
Right.
And depending on what ministry organization you're working with, you might not be part of a movement or a ministry that has like a headquarters that will collect all that information for you. You really have to take the responsibility yourself to collect quality information about your supporters, and that goes beyond just their mailing address and their email and their phone number, but even information about how many kids they have, what are the names of their kids, what are their prayer intentions, like what are the things that I want to know about as I journey in relationship with this person. Because if you don't collect that information, it's not going to be available to you later when you want to send them a birthday message or like I said, send them a newsletter. Like, you can't do that if you don't have the information.
Well, I know that some people like me go, "Oh, well, I have some of that." I mean, I have some of that in my contact card. I have their email and their phone and their address and a picture of them and stuff like that. But your contact cards in your smartphone, that really doesn't cover everything. That doesn't cover, okay, really, when's their anniversary? Like, what are the name of their kids? Did you really put all that in the contact card? So the odds are most people don't. And so, Joseph, I'm agreeing with everything you say here. I'm just trying to make a finer point. Having a database that tracks your relationship and some of those details with your partners in ministry, that is much more than just an Excel spreadsheet. That is much more than just having a contact card in your smartphone, right?
Oh, absolutely. And there's several different, like, I'm not trying to promote any specific database. I know SRS through Bootcamp, you guys recommend a couple. If you go to one of the support raising leadership conferences, they have all these different organizations who basically create databases you can use available for people you can talk to. So I don't want to plug anyone in specific, but I do have a database that was created by a ministry that is not CCO, and that is what I use for managing my own supporters. And I'm sure, Aaron, you have something similar for yourself.
Oh, for sure, for sure. In fact, I would just direct people to, if you want to find out more about some of these different type of support raising databases. We call them MPD software, and you can go to SRS's website, and we have a resources page, and there's several of them that are listed on there. It tells you kind of what they do and what they don't do, and all that kind of stuff. And so, Callie Bootholtz has actually spent quite a good deal amount of time kind of digging in and doing some of the legwork for you. So Support Raising Solutions doesn't pick a like the best software like that. We're not in that environment. We're not selling any of them. But if you go on our resources page, you'll see we list several from MPDX to Karani, TNT, Donor Elf, Simple Sam, Support Goal. That's probably not an exhaustive list, but that's some of the ones that we're aware of. And so from that standpoint, I would certainly encourage the listeners be using one of those. If you want to see that list and even some of our reviews on that, you can go to supportraisingsolutions.org/resources. And there's all kinds of resources on that page that might be helpful for people as they're raising their support. It doesn't replace going to training. Everybody, you really need to go to training, whether it's an SRS boot camp or something else. But these are some of the resources that you might want to use after training.
Just a brief sidebar here to our listeners. Perhaps you've wanted to recruit someone to your staff team but aren't sure how to broach the topic of support raising without either scaring them away or shoving a full copy of the Godass book into their hands. So, wouldn't you like an 8-page booklet that might calm their fears and quickly unpack the basic how-tos from a practical and biblical perspective? We actually have a booklet like that. It's called The 5 Keys to Support Raising, and you can get these booklets in English or in Spanish at cmmpress.org. You'll receive an additional 10% discount if you use the code SRS Podcast.
Back to our topic at hand, Joseph. I know that logging that, the garbage in, garbage out, and having a good database, that's a big, big deal. But let's go ahead and segue. You said you had 4 key elements. What's the second key element?
That's right. So the second element would be care. Caring for the relationships you have, because beyond actually logging all of your touch points with people, you can actually care for your donors, for your supporters, for your ministry partners by keeping an up-to-date database. And what do I mean by this? So let's give an example. Over communication. If you are raising support full-time or raising support part-time, you're going to be contacting people, and you might forget how many times you've tried dialing a particular supporter. Like if I'm trying to ask Aaron for support and I've dialed him 10 times and he hasn't answered yet, there's a suggestion I should try a different method of communicating with him. And if I'm not logging that in my database, the fact that I've attempted him 10 times, I'm going to completely lose track of the information because I can only keep so much knowledge in my head at a time. And that kind of minute detail of how many touch points have I had with Aaron this week, I'm going to forget about that. So it's really important, not just when you're support raising to reach a goal, but once you have started living in your ministry, to take regular time for your supporters, to acknowledge, oh, I can see here it took me 5 dials to actually reach Aaron when I was support raising full time. So I see I actually spoke to him at 12:30 p.m. Okay, I'm going to try calling him when it's 12:30 p.m. his time, and he'll most likely be able to actually answer the phone then.
So there's a bit of caring for the relationship, but also really logging those interactions and kind of keeping up with some of those details. That's really key. So those are a couple different keys there. It would be caring for them, but also keeping up with those interactions so that you know when was the last time you communicated. Now, I'll be honest, Joseph. I'll be real honest. Sometimes I don't keep track of that stuff, but I want it to happen naturally, right? I don't want it to be canned and be like, oh, it has been 9 weeks since I talked to Joe Schmo, so I need to call him to, on bit. Like, I don't want it to be like overly canned that way. But that doesn't mean you can't set up some sort of alarms or reminders if you haven't interacted with somebody lately, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the different systems, of course, have different ways of doing that. But it's also just to know if you're seeking to pray for a particular supporter, and maybe you're going to send them an email saying, hey, I prayed for you today. Well, guarantee you're not going to remember 100 days from now that you had sent that email. And so maybe it's helpful for you to know, okay, I'm going to ask this person for increase. Oh, I look at my history. Oh, like I emailed them 87 days ago and they said that they wanted me to pray for a particular intention. Well, I'm going to make sure, in spirit of caring for this person, when I call them for an increase, I'm going to see what is going on in their family. Like where's that intention at? Like, should I continue to pray for the thing they're asking for? Or maybe they have a glory story about something that happened as a result of that prayer intention.
Ask for feedback. Ask how it's going. Yeah, and don't just say, hey, I'm going to pray, but make sure you're praying. But then sometimes, when you do follow up with them, people, like, they appreciate when you go, hey, you asked me to pray about your business, that you're really needing more customers. I just want to let you know that is on my prayer list. If you have any updates on that, please let me know. I've had that conversation with people, and I've gotten like both kinds of responses. Like, I've heard from people that have said, oh, thank you, please keep praying. It's really thin right now. We're really needing more customers. Or I've had the flip side of people are like, man, God's listening because we're almost turning customers away. We have so many, but they specifically had asked me to pray for their business. Well, I want to be praying for their business, but I don't want to stop there. I want to communicate back with them later on and say, hey, I have been praying about this. Can you update me so I know how to pray next, right?
Absolutely. My third key here is logging, and I'm not referring to chopping down trees when I say this. It's kind of an extension of what I was already talking about with logging interactions. And I know the question people are going to ask is, well, what's the minimum? Like, what is the absolute minimal amount of information I can put in my database to be compliant or to be stewarding them well? And to be honest, I don't know about you, Aaron, but I don't have like a minimum amount of information. Like there's no bare minimum. As much information as possible is helpful, because again, in the spirit of maybe you have a perfect memory and you remember every single thing you do.
It doesn't happen.
Yeah. And if you're one of those people listening to this, and you have that kind of memory, good on you, but you're definitely the exception to the rule.
Yeah. Well, what I do is, of course, I try and do a monthly, like personal. I shouldn't say personal. I try and do a monthly communication. So this is often a newsletter. I plan to be, at the time I'm recording this, I plan to be in Malaysia soon, and I'm gonna do some sort of postcard or something that. I won't actually send it from there, but I'll take a picture from there. And anyway, point is there's going to be some sort of monthly communication, but then that's not the same as personal. So from that standpoint, Joseph, to answer your question, I'm not super scientific about it, but I have realized that I want to reach out personally, and I'm not talking about newsletter. I want to reach out personally, maybe as often as 4 or 5 times every year to all of my supporters, whether that's a phone call or a text message, or I just talk to them at men's coffee or whatever else. And that's separate of the newsletter, because I want to build that relationship. But if I'm not paying attention and logging it every now and then, I might not remember so I might be thinking of my friend Scott and go, yeah, I'm pretty sure I just messaged him the other day. Well, if I open up my MPD software, I'm saying the other day, and I might thinking that was like a week or two ago. Well, no, it was 3 months ago. It was 4 months ago. I'm not over communicating. I might be under communicating. It might be a good time to reach out to him, right?
Absolutely. And again, in the spirit of stewarding the relationship well, the database can remember for you, how many times have I interacted with a supporter this year? And again, if you're in the ministry life for the long haul, you're going to go through seasons where you need to raise new support. So looking back, it's like, who are the people that I've had positive interactions with, and like who has responded to my newsletters, like who has actually replied the emails saying they were excited about what they heard. And there's just so much potential that can come from keeping your database healthy and keeping your accounts of who has been a part of your ministry healthy. That, yes, of course, there's there's practical benefits and like potentially new support, but also like the spiritual benefits. Like if we God has given us these people so that we can steward them and bring them closer to Christ. And any bit of information we have about, oh, like they actually called me because something was going on in their life and they asked me to pray with them. That's really important information to remember the next time you're going to be in touch with them, because it means that there might be an openness to grow deeper in their relationship with Jesus than they would have before.
Yeah. I will say though, that doesn't mean that you record absolutely everything all the time and you're constantly in your MPD software. There's probably somebody thinking about that. So let me give you a little permission here. Those of you listeners that are worried about that, there might be, I'll say as much as 20%, maybe 30%, perhaps it's only 10 for you. You might have some supporters that you just see them, like you see them all the time. Okay, that might be a little bit different, right? Those might be people that you're not like, okay, every time I run into, Mr. Smith, I have to go back. Well, no, you see Mr. Smith every day or almost every other day. So you might not need to record every one of those. However, you might want to make sure that there's a couple times during the year where you go out of your way and ask yourself a question like, hey, when's the last time I really had a deeper conversation with Mr. Smith? When's the last time I just said, hey, Mr. Smith, you're on my prayer list this morning. I know I see you all the time, but you haven't updated me recently about that thing. How's that going? And so it still takes some organization, but maybe you're not tracking things quite so closely with somebody who's a normal part of your daily or weekly rhythm. So there's a little bit of grace and permission and all that to try and think intelligently. Okay, how do I how do I log these interactions with somebody that might be a little bit more common for me to interact with? So,
No,
okay.
very good point, Aaron. And just to put a caution on that as well, there could be a temptation, especially if you're support raising full time, to spend too much time in your database, like adding actions for every specific time you do anything. And you're working, but you're not actively working to raise new support. So just, yeah, absolutely right. Don't log every single time you see a supporter, and be intentional with what you log, because you can fall into a trap of spending too much time in there unnecessarily.
Yeah, great, great. Okay, so we said 4 key elements. We've hit 3: integrity, care, log. What's your 4th one, my friend?
Well, it's pretty simple. It's planning. And again, this is we've kind of touched on this a bit, but the idea that if you're planning to be in ministry for 1 year, 3 years, 40 years, it's really important that you are able to plan out ahead how your support raising is going to impact your ministry. So again, if you're only support raising for a ministry role you're doing for 1 year, then you obviously have like a very fixed deadline in mind, and perhaps you only need to raise support once. But if you feel like God is calling you to ministry beyond that initial commitment, the reality is you're going to need to seek renewals. You're going to need to seek referrals. You're going to seek the opportunities for increases, reaching out to new people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you intentionally use your database well, the planning that needs to happen for your support raising can be a lot simpler and exciting, because you can look at the people God has brought into your life that are in your database and say, wow, like there's so much opportunity here to invite this person to renew, or possibly offer some referrals, or even invite them to increase. So you can like create activity for each of those people based on how you want to interact with them. And I know SRS encourages people who are living out their ministry full time to create like an annual plan of
Mm-hmm.
all the touch points they want to have with their supporters. Well,
Yeah.
if you're forward thinking enough, you can actually plan out, who do I want to ask for an increase this year? When am I going to ask them for an increase? Who do I want to ask for referrals? When am I going to ask them for referrals? And you can put those touch points in your database so that when it comes time to do them, you'll already know they're there.
Yep. Yep. And Joseph, you're starting to hit on some training stuff right now. And so, again, I apologize if I say this too much. This is just a podcast. There's good information on here. And Joseph, you're bringing some gold. This really shouldn't replace everybody getting some great support raising training, whether it's through an SRS boot camp, or maybe your organization does something different. But there's more questions here, Joseph, that we're not even digging into, like what is the bare minimum amount of information that I can put in my database, or can I get somebody to do this for me, or my donors are supporting me in ministry, not for administration work. How do I justify this? Where do I find the time? All that kind of stuff. And that's part of the reason that we say, hey, you need to get training in this stuff, because absolutely there's a lot to think about here, but it's not just a head thing. There's a heart thing. There's a planning thing. And so hopefully this episode's been encouraging for people as they consider the reality of using a database and leaning into some of these administration things. They actually can help you get and stay fully funded, but make sure that it's a part of your normal flow. It really shouldn't feel like an interruption of your ministry, though. And of course, we talk about that more in the SRS boot camp. But well, anyway, Joseph, this is good, helpful stuff. I think we've given people a lot of things to think about. Before we go, though, I want to encourage you, Joseph, to kind of give us a final last word, or thought, or even scripture that kind of closes us out.
Thank you. So at the last SRS Support Raising Leaders Conference, I spoke to one of the creators of these database systems. And I said, well, what was your inspiration? He said, well, when I started ministry, they gave us recipe cards, and they told us this was how you were meant to keep track of your supporters and your relationships with them. And my jaw dropped to the floor, because I just couldn't imagine the process of support raising with nothing else but a bunch of recipe cards. So, thank the Lord, we live in an era where we do have software that can make the process of databasing and maintaining relationships with supporters excellent. The scripture verse I want to lean on for this, to encourage our support raisers and our listeners, comes from the Gospel of Luke. And it's Luke 12:48, where it says, "From everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required, and from one to whom much has been entrusted, even more will be demanded." And so the Lord has blessed us with the people that He has put in our lives, and He's given us this opportunity to steward them and to invite them to partner in ministry. And we have a great responsibility given to us by the Lord to care for these people and to do everything we possibly can to ensure that their relationship with us is a healthy one that will bring them closer into relationship with our Lord.
Yep. Yep. And I'll just say everything you just said, I completely agree with, but also that is a process that starts now. It doesn't start once you're fully funded. If you are fully funded, it should have already started. If you're just starting to raise support, it's a now thing. This organization, time management, using a database, all that kind of stuff. Please don't think that that's something to put off until later. It takes a lot of focus and time, and so we encourage people to make sure you've been through an SRS boot camp or some other similar training, but don't put off getting organized in this area, because it will actually bless you and help you in the vision of ministry that God has given you for His glory. So Joseph, great, my friend. I really appreciate you taking the time to jump on the podcast with me today. God bless you, and thanks for being a part.
You're welcome, Aaron. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisingsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.